So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of a different view on data and big data, and more from certainly an American perspective and also from a Silicon Valley perspective. So I hope this is useful and interesting to you, and kind of how I see things playing out in this area from a more industrial and company point of view. And I now live in Silicon Valley. I'm about a mile from Facebook, a mile from Stanford, and about 5 miles from Google. And I was walking in my neighborhood about 5 years ago, and there was a couple of guys, young guys, walking their dog in front of me. And I hear them talk, and they're talking about, oh, well, we're going to develop this app. And, you know, everyone's developing an app in Silicon Valley. So we're going to develop this app for farmers, because we think that farmers don't know what they're doing, and they don't know how to use information, and we're going to tell them how to farm. So hearing this, and having spent so much of my career in agriculture, you know, I thought, okay, we're about to go for a wild ride, and I don't know what these guys think they're going to do, but this should be interesting. So that kind of started this whole area of, you know, people looking at the tools that we've been developing in big data in all sorts of other applications, and saying, how can we take these tools and apply them to ag? So what I'm going to talk about today are 4 different areas, starting a little bit on some of the new breeding technology, which has a big basis in big data and how we understand what's happening in breeding. I'll talk briefly about food tracking. Then I'll spend the majority of the time looking at data analytics and farming, and kind of what we're now calling digital ag, and then touch on the effect on the supply chain of this technology. So there's a number of new ways that data is disrupting the value chains and kind of having people look at things differently. And these are caused by things that we can do differently now. And one is gathering data. So around all the new sensors that are out there, the drones that are out there, a lot of the self-driving vehicles, we can collect lots of data on what's going on in the field that before we weren't able to collect. The important part of that is that now we can analyze that information, especially across a lot of different farms. So before, the information would come in to one farmer on their fields, and they could make the decisions that they could make based on their farm, but now we're looking at it across many different farms, and able to get more information and analyze that information. And then able to really disperse that information. When I first started looking at this area, I remember being in a meeting about 8 years ago, and we were talking about, you know, how can we use all these tools in farming? And one of the biggest issues was that there was a lot of places in farming America that couldn't get connected to the internet, especially out in the field. So you could think you could use all these tools, but if there wasn't a way to get the information to what ended up being the cloud and then get information back, then they weren't really valuable. But now I think, you know, there's very few pockets, especially in the U.S., that you don't have connectivity. So there was a study that was done in 2015 by McKinsey Global Institute that said that ag is the least digitized major industry in the U.S. And I think that we're going to see that change over the next couple of years. So looking just at plant breeding, there was quite a bit of conversation about this yesterday in some of the sessions. And this is currently what I'm spending most of my time on. I spent a lot of time over the last couple of years consulting for a variety of different companies, and worked with companies in kind of the big data area, and now I'm working full-time for a company that's working with the CRISPR technology and applying it to agriculture. So what's exciting in plant breeding is we've kind of gotten to this point because of technologies leading up to this. Because of next-gen sequencing, we can sequence so much of the plant genome, and we're able to read DNA and write DNA. And now at this time, having those technologies, having the discovery of CRISPR really is going to enable us to do plant breeding in a whole different way. So it's a really exciting time to be in this field. There's, as was discussed yesterday, there's a lot of questions on how this is going to get regulated and how consumers are going to accept it. But I think if you look at genome selection and really understanding the genetics and genotype to phenotype, being able to use CRISPR to direct breeding is going to let us make incredible gains in areas with, like drought resistance and things that are going to be affected by climate change. So I won't go through each of these companies, but these you'll get a copy of the presentation. You can look them up if you're interested. But these are a number of the companies that are looking at new breeding techniques and really trying to take this to a different level using data. I'm working right now for Caribou Biosciences. We're a startup that has the UC Berkeley rights to CRISPR technology. So most of the company is working on the therapeutic applications. I'm the one ag person that's trying to figure out what do we do with this in ag. We do have an agreement with DuPont in that they're using our technology on some of the row crops, but we're also looking as a company what we might do. And as I mentioned, the regulation is really an issue. There have been some articles that you might have seen about the mushroom that got through the USDA, and the USDA said this isn't a plant pest, it doesn't fall into our current regulatory scheme, so we're saying this is not GMO, so it's not regulated. There's also a product that DuPont's been working on, their waxy corn, which they'll use the cornstarch part for building materials, so it's not even going into the food chain, and that's been given the same letter saying you're not regulated. This could be good news, but I'm actually quite concerned that consumers are going to feel uncomfortable about this because they think that nobody's paying attention. So I'm hoping that there is going to be a light regulation, not the same regulation as GMO, but that there will be some regulation so consumers at least know what's going on. We expect that the US, Canada, Argentina, Japan, and Brazil will probably have similar type of light regulation of the technology. That's a hope anyway. And in Europe, Europe will do what Europe does, and probably they're looking at it right now. It's in the European Court of Justice, and the European Court of Justice has 2 years to decide if it fits into the current language. So what would be great if they kind of started over, but they're just trying to see how does this plug into our current language, and they'll probably say it's GMO, and then we'll be in the same cycle, which will have huge implications on trade, as has been talked about here. So moving on to food tracking. So using big data systems for food tracking is becoming more and more important and really gives a farm-to-fork information flow to consumers that's incredibly valuable. It can be used to prevent foodborne diseases. Right now, 76 million people a year die in the U.S. from foodborne diseases. It can also be used to reduce waste in the supply chain, and this is becoming worldwide, getting a lot of attention right now, that 40% of all the food in the developed markets is thrown away and 15% of the produce. And so what can we do with sensors, scanners, and analytics to make sure that we keep the food supply safe and that we don't throw as much away? So temperature and humidity is monitored throughout the supply chain, and then you're able to get alerts if something's going wrong in that supply chain that might ruin the food or make the food less safe, and also allows for quick recalls if there needs to be recalls at retail. This also improves a lot of the warehouse operations, and there's also work being done on understanding pathogens and be able to predict if you have some sort of outbreak, what's going to happen and what can we do to stop it. So moving then into really looking at development of digital ag, and I got this graphic, it came out of a Harvard Business Review article, and I think it's a really good graphic of showing kind of how things are moving along and what's happening with big data in farming. So if you look at the number one where it says product, so you have a tractor. And number two, you have a tractor that collects data. And number three, you have tractor that collects data that you can get on your phone or transmit it to your computer. And then number 4, you have data that can talk to other tractors on your farm or other pieces of equipment, and you're starting to pull data together. And then on the last one, in number 5, really shows the value of all the different inputs. So you've got inputs from sensors on what's the temperature in the soil, you've got weather predictive data that's coming in, you've got all sorts of information on your seeds. So looking at how important that's going to be with all that information together across many different farms. And so the informatics that's underneath all that and the deep learning that will be used to give you information that you just never could have had before. So it's similar to kind of plant breeding. I think we're coming to this nexus in digital ag as well, is that because there's all these tools, now we can actually use all those tools in a platform to really understand and analyze this data. Before these tools were available and before farms could talk to the cloud, then you couldn't really use these tools. So this is a point where there is so much unharvested data points out there. And one of the challenges is, when you talk to farmers, and I'll talk about this more later, is just the trust issue. There's all this unharvested data, but people are not so sure they want to give it up. So there's really granular data sets on all these different areas. You've got soil mapping, tillage, planting, fertilizer, pests, and yield, and you just put all that information and are able to do some really great analysis. This kind of gives you a sense of what the market is now and where we think it's going to go. And the 3 different areas that are spending on big data and analytics are agroscience, kind of in the plant breeding and the crop protection area, machines and equipment, and technology. In case you can't tell, the agroscience is green, the machines and equipment is black, and the technology is blue. Right now, most amount of money is being spent on the technology, but if you look out into 2021, we really think that people are going to continue to spend in this area and in this area around data, and it'll get up to $15 billion a year in market size at 2021. Then you look at the map on the bottom, and this is kind of what you would expect as the market potential. And so North America, because we have big farms and because we're more connected already, that you would make sense that that's where a lot of the market penetration will be. I think in Europe, a lot of the penetration will come around some of the specialty crops because the value is so high. So I think as people start using big data and have that drive their decisions, there's going to be great adoption there. And then in South America, I think the adoption a lot will come, from the big farms in Brazil. So digital ag brings a lot of things to the whole supply chain and to farmers specifically. So one is transparency, and really the visibility of costs and yields around the global market is kind of a transparency that farmers haven't had in the past, of really understanding their costs and other farmers' costs, their yields and other farmers' yields, and being able to look at that across a global market is incredibly valuable and something that they haven't had access to before. Another piece is expertise. Many times the expertise has been tied to products, so a lot of consultants or agronomists or even from universities that are helping farmers, that's been expertise they've had to kind of piece together and find the people that they want to work with. And of course, those people will still exist and are still useful, but a lot of the information a farmer's now going to be able to get off of their farm and the farms around them in data and information that they can make decisions on themselves. Automation is going to continue, having self-driving tractors and crop counting machines and drones. There's a continuation of those use and the usefulness of those. But also what we're seeing is a lot of streamlined workflows. So one of the companies I've worked with is developing different apps to help farmers make decisions, and they said, well, the biggest thing that we're replacing is just a pad of paper and a pen. So now you've got, all of this on your phone, and you can look at it instead of, scribbling it down or even using Excel spreadsheets. So the automation is going to continue to help farmers make good decisions. And then the precision of these decisions, with precision ag, we've been driving this direction, but again, a lot of precision ag was based on the information a farmer could get from their farm specifically, and now with being able to use data across many farms, they'll be able to be even more precise on their applications and the type of seed that they buy. But there are a lot of adoption issues. So when you talk about how I've been talking for the last few minutes, you think that this is really easy and everyone's just doing this. But certainly I've talked to a lot of farmers that are having huge amounts of adoption issues of this technology. Talked to many farmers that have sent their children off to school to become computer programmers, and then they come home and they can kind of help piece all this together because it's not seamless right now. One of the problems I hear the most from farmers is that the focus is on the technology, not on the value to the farm. And I think a lot of this is because people like the guys in my neighborhood have no idea what goes on a farm, and they're just focusing on what the app can do and not how it actually brings value, or that actually farming is seasonal, and if you give the information at the wrong time, it doesn't matter. So there's so many things that just haven't been kind of tied together because it's just focusing on this app. I think that will change, but that's certainly how this has all started. Time versus value is another piece. I've talked to a number of farmers that say they have to input the same piece of information in like 3 different places for it to be usable. And learning new systems takes a huge amount of time. So I've heard people talk about app fatigue. They've got so many guys coming at them saying, buy my app, no, buy my app. And they just don't want to hear about it anymore. And anytime you try to learn something new, it takes time away from what you were doing before. So for a lot of farmers, I don't think it's hit that critical point of learning this or doing this or entering this information is really valuable to me. Also, data is needed from multiple farms, and so this is kind of tied to the last point around trust again, is that this, farmers are a very independent lot, and, when you ask them for their data, they want to know, what are you using my data for, and are you going to sell it to the government, and the government's going to come and regulate me, or are you going to sell it to Monsanto, and Monsanto's going to, know too much about my farm? So I think there's a lot of area around distrust that we need to work with to really make sure that their data becomes anonymous. And I think this is playing out in the medical field right now as well, because a lot of people are gathering data on your bodies and putting it out there in an anonymous way so that more research can be done. So I think this is kind of part of the evolution of seeing the value of data and feeling safe that someone's not going to use your data against you. Also delivering insights, not just data. So everybody's swimming, and we certainly feel this just as individuals, the amount of information that comes to you on your phone, and it's just so much information. And so we're all swimming in information and data, but it really needs to deliver insights. It needs to tell you something that's helpful, not just a whole bunch of data. So I think that's another piece that more work needs to be done on just kind of bringing all that data together. One of the companies I've done some work with is Farmers Business Network, and this is what they're trying to do is how can we bring all this information that's being picked up from all these other companies and put it into a platform, analyze that information, and then spit out something that's actually useful. So there's a number of companies that are trying to figure out how to do this. We're likely going to end up with too many separate platforms, but that's happened before with technology as well. Here's a list of companies that are involved. Many of them are from the Bay Area, but are doing some of this work around digital ag. Again, you can go through this on your own if you're interested, but it's been an interesting evolution living in Silicon Valley and kind of watching the VC money that's moving into these companies. And I can tell you at this point, if you walked into venture capitalists and just told them you wanted to do a drone company, they would send you away. So at the beginning, it was all drones and it was all apps. And now people are saying, okay, we have enough drones and we probably have enough apps. So how are we going to make this really useful and use these tools to create companies that can really help agriculture? And so I think there's a little bit of too much money that's been invested in these early stage companies that don't have a good business model. And I think there's a little bit of a pause in investing to start looking at, how are we really going to create value for farmers? So the farmers are kind of stuck in the middle of the value chain. They've got, all these people with the inputs, equipment, retail and co-ops, and then they've got all the people that they sell to. And so to date, they've kind of been in the middle with not enough information about those two sides of the chain. And I think this whole area with big data is that, now farmers are actually, they're going to have as much information as everybody else, which I think is, about time. So really getting the visibility on product results. So if before, I've heard stories where a farmer has been buying a certain brand of seed from, one of the big companies and not getting great results. And so the salesman says, well, just plant twice as many seeds. It'll be fine, you'll get germination. And then now with kind of the systems that are set up, with big data is that they can see what everybody around them is planting, and maybe that was like the worst variety for them to be planting in that particular part of their field. So getting the visibility on products and being able to be your own expert, not listening to necessarily the people who are selling to you, is of great value. Pricing transparency. I think this is an area that is going to be really exciting. There's so many layers of distribution and all these kind of opaque pricing strategies of, if you buy the seed, then you have to buy the chemical, and we're going to tie it all together, and you don't really know what anything costs. And I think there's going to be a lot of different ways that farmers can get product. Why not have Amazon deliver your seed? Why do you have to go through 4 levels of distribution? So it's going to be very disruptive, and I think there's a kind of a lot of fat that's been built in some of the distribution in the U.S., and the farmer should not have to pay for all that. So this is an area I'm excited to watch how that plays out over time. I think a lot of the innovation favors small companies. This remains to be seen, and I'm working for one of these small companies right now, so I'm really hoping that this is true. But there's so many. The big companies have built big R&D organizations and big distribution organizations around the need of having to have a lot of infrastructure. And I think, for example, my company with using CRISPR, it isn't as easy as everyone says, but it is easier than doing a transgenic using agrobacterium having to use a big lab. So we can do with less very skilled people than someone like Monsanto would have to hire to do some of the old breeding techniques. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. What has happened in the past with companies like mine is that you get to a choke point because you don't have access to the farmers or the germplasm. And so I think new business models are coming up. It's like, how do we have access to these farmers and not having to go through, some of the big companies? So, that's to be determined. I think the area around trust is really important, and we'll see how that plays out, and hopefully we don't have big companies coming in and using the data for a reason that farmers get upset about, that trust can continue to be built so that more data is available to more people. So predictions, what do we think where is this all going to go? I think farming will become increasingly data-based. Farmers are getting more and more data, using the data, excited about the data. There's going to be a downward trend in pricing for some of the robots and automation, so that will lead to increased use. As it's cheaper to use, people will use it more data will be collected. Data will have to value if it's combined and aggregated. As I've said, we need data across many, many farms, not just one, to make really the informatics piece valuable. The drive towards a common platform, I think, it's similar to VCR and beta. We're kind of at that point where people are trying to figure out what's the platform, what operating system are we going to use, and I think there'll be some confusion and missteps there, but hopefully we've learned that, it's helpful to get platforms that are compatible with each other. I think these type of huge network effects can lead to monopolies, and so I'm hoping that there's more collaborations and less monopolies where smaller companies and innovative companies can work together along the value chain instead of big, huge conglomerates owning the whole chain. I just think more innovation and more value to the farmer will happen through that pathway. I think with a lot of the changes with climate change, will cause some regulatory changes that will make us look more at how do we deal with drought and how do we deal with flooding and what are the technology-based solutions to deal with some of the changes that are going to happen to our environment. And that is the end. I look forward to any questions, and I'm staying around the rest of the morning if anybody wants to talk about any of these things. Thank you very much.